So shared ethics, values, and beliefs. Okay, so unity is when people come together to have that. And unity isn't given because societies change and morph and become something different. And that's a good thing. What you have to ensure is that you have pride in your ethics, values, and beliefs. So pride in your history, pride in how you got there, and a path forward to a future that everyone knows will maintain that unity.
Welcome to another episode of Dialogue Over Division. And with me today, I have the former Lieutenant Colonel David Redman. And I always say I'm really excited to have this guest on my podcast, but today I'm incredibly excited. And I feel a little bit like Canada needs a voice from David Redman and some wisdom and some knowledge from this gentleman. And I'm really looking forward to having this discussion because I feel like in Canada and the world, there's a lot going on. And I think that individual citizens are having a hard time, myself included, digesting a lot of what's going on and then knowing exactly what to do. So I'm going to ask David to help us out with some of that. Maybe in pieces, I think we're going to take it. But like I said, just if you could give us maybe first a little bit of an introduction of who you are, and then let's work into the meat and potatoes of all of this.
Absolutely. And thanks for having me, Eva. I want to go back to 1967. I was a teenager in 1967. I joined the Army in 1972, and I had 27 years in the Canadian Army all over the world. And so I got to see the world's view of Canada. I served in Europe 3 times, served in the United States, and served on operations on many of the continents. And so I always had this wonderful opportunity to see how other people saw Canada. But I want to take you back for what a teenager thought about Canada in 1967. And so the centenary year of our country was fabulous. As a young person looking at a future in our country, it was a time of exuberance. People were confident in our future. We had a great economy. We had a strong armed forces. In fact, there was a tattoo went coast to coast in Canada. And it was a thing of real pride. And Canadians showed out in droves. The activities on Parliament Hill, but in every capital across our country, in every province and territory, it was a time to celebrate, and everyone felt an exuberance. In fact, many people in the world said the next 100 years belong to Canada. So if I take that feeling that I had as a teenager in 1967, I looked around myself in the last 5 years, and I now have 6 grandchildren. And 4 years ago, they were all teenagers. They're now in their 20s, just starting their lives. But I thought to myself, I wonder how they see Canada right now. Right after COVID, 2022, 2023, they're finishing their education. They're starting out into the world like I did when I joined the Army. And their perception of Canada is totally different than my perception of Canada in 1967. And so I've been trying for the past 4 years to engage Canadians to try and get them to talk about their country in a positive way with a long-term vision for the future. And I wrote a paper which is on the Frontier Centre for Public Policy called Canada 2024. And so it was sort of 3 years in the writing, and then I put it out in March of 2024. And the title is Canada 2024. You can Google it on the Frontier Centre for Public Policy. But what I was trying to do was say to people, this is what we used to be and the pride we used to have in our country. How did we get from there to here? That's sort of the first half of the paper with a narrative. But then a real solution. In the Army, I was always taught you never bring a challenge without a solution. If you do, the boss will throw you out the door. Mm-hmm. So in the paper, the second half of the paper is, how do we redefine Canada with a 25-year positive, confident vision of the future? And then how do we engage Canadians to walk that vision forward? So that's how I've kind of spent the last 3 to 4 years, and in particular, the last year and a half, really trying to talk to people about the things that define a nation and how you engage Canadians into that discussion.
Lovely. And I really like what you said, and I didn't know this was a military thing, but don't come to me with a problem without a solution. And I am so on board with that. I feel that people are identifying problems left, right, and center, and in fact, just looking for somebody else to solve the problem. And that is getting a little bit, it's too much. So when did you write the paper? Sorry.
The paper was published March 2024, and it was called Canada 2024. I actually wrote it over the Christmas holidays, 2023, because I was getting so frustrated looking at how the government was trying to destroy and diminish our history, how they were trying to break Canadians into smaller and smaller groups. And of course, we just had the 3-year horror of the use of lockdowns during COVID. And it seemed that there was no atmosphere, no mood, no desire by elected officials to try and change that course. They were very happy controlling Canadians rather than inspiring them. So I wrote it over the Christmas holidays and then refined it and showed it to some people and had discussions and got it published in March 2024.
Okay. And you said that you watched the government destroying history and dividing people. And are you talking about what you saw over COVID, or did you already see that coming before COVID? And what would be some examples?
Okay, from my point of view, it started in 2015. And with the election of the Trudeau government, and not being political about it, but I saw him as a continuation of his father. So again, maybe I can step you back in history. I lived through Pierre Trudeau.
Mhm.
I lived through Pierre Trudeau in the army. I was a soldier when he was prime minister for almost his entire leadership term. And the entire idea of multiculturalism was nothing more than trying to break Canada into smaller and smaller groups and pit them against each other, which was introduced by Pierre Trudeau, but I would say to you, refined and taken to an extreme by his son. And so, yes, it was COVID. COVID was almost like the perfectly timed event to take what he started in 2015 and bring it to full maturity, which is fracturing a nation through economically, through unity. And so maybe when we get into a discussion of what defines the 6 national interests of a country, I believe that from 2015 till the end of his tenure, in 10 years, he focused on each one of those 6 national interests and intentionally destroyed each one. And we can talk about that now or in subsequent discussions. But the whole point of it is Canada saw itself very differently in 2013. In the paper, I discussed the evolution from 1967 on. And so maybe a quick discussion about helicopter parenting and bulldozer parenting is warranted. And I actually discussed them in the paper because Canadians in 1967 were self-reliant, self-disciplined. They expected to accept responsibility for what happened in their life. They knew that risk was theirs to manage. After 20 years of helicopter parenting, and to be clear, helicopter parenting is where a parent would remove their child from any situation that made them uncomfortable because it didn't seem fair that their child would be in a bullying situation or in a confrontational situation. And I'm against bullying, but part of growing up is learning how to deal with difficult people and difficult challenges. And so 20 years of helicopter parenting created a generation that when a challenge was presented to them, it was removed. So they were plucked out. But those children turned into parents, which then led to 20 years of bulldozer parenting. So instead of extracting a child from a difficult situation, many of those children, when they became parents, removed people that presented a challenge to their child. Instead of removing the child, they removed the challenge. And so teachers suddenly got to the point where they couldn't discipline a child in class, where police officers were afraid to intervene because parents would have them lose their job. Elected officials realized that the public wanted them to manage all risk. And so after 20 years of helicopter parenting, 20 years of bulldozer parenting, we ended up right before COVID in time for 2015 to happen, where people believed honestly in their heart that all risk needed to be managed either by government or by someone else, but not them. And what you ended up with is a group of people who had lost self-discipline, but they had also lost their self-confidence. Because when you receive participation awards instead of merit awards, everybody is treated equal, even if they don't contribute to the project in school. They're all going to graduate anyhow. Nobody's going to hold them back a year. There is no challenge that's allowed to be presented to them that will cause them emotional harm. And so we've got to this point now in our society where we find government has very happily embraced, in particular in the last 10 years, fine, we'll take care of all the risks in your lives. Now you have to do exactly what we tell you. And that's how you lead yourself down that path to a total authoritarian government. And we're in that point right now. We see a government right now, change in leadership, same story, where there's no need to present a budget. You'll just do what I tell you, and I don't have to account to you for money. I'm just going to announce 9 billion more in spending for the armed forces, which of course will never be spent on the armed forces. But there's no accountability. When asked directly, where's that money going to come from? There was no answer. So, and the Canadian public isn't outraged. The Canadian public is quite happy. They just say, manage the risk for me. So those intervening years have caused a change in society. And so in the paper, I recognize the fact that you don't turn on a dime. You need to redevelop the ability for every citizen to accept risk in their lives and to be able to manage it themselves and only turn to others as a last resort, not as a first resort. And so then I lay the paper out saying, okay, how do you describe a country?
Very interesting. First question I have is, and I'll give you my answer too, is why I think, in case you don't want to pause it and answer why, but why do you think Pierre Elliott Trudeau and then Justin Trudeau wanted to see this kind of destruction? And just as you were talking about it, the only thing that came to mind was easier to control people.
Absolutely correct. As well, but fundamental, there's a fundamental belief in a different form of government. Pierre Trudeau was unabashedly a communist. Okay, and I don't have to give you any proof other than tell you to read history. His greatest idols were Mao Zedong, Stalin, Nikita Khrushchev at the time, and Stalin, and Fidel Castro. He intentionally visited all those people to tweak the nose of the United States and to say, Canada is going to be like them, not like you. And so that entire concept of communism has a supreme leader. And Pierre Trudeau always felt that he wasn't really accountable to Parliament. When he repatriated the Constitution, it was to give himself more control, not the citizens of Canada. And so his son was raised in a house that idolized communist government and frequently visited them as a youth growing up. And hence you hear the statement before he became prime minister to that ladies group that he was talking to, that the former, when asked the question, which government do you think is best in the world? He said the communist government of China, because they can turn on a dime and they can get things done in a heartbeat. Well, that's what you can do in a totalitarian government. And that's how he pictured himself and where he walked to. So it's clear that it was intentional, and the way you take a country that is a firm democracy and walk it to communism, the first thing you have to do is fracture unity, which is the first of the 6 national interests that define a country. And so unity and national security are the first 2 of 6 national interests, and we'll get to them all in a minute. But those first 2 define a country. The most simple definition of a country is when a group of people come together with common values and ethics, and live inside a geographic region with defended borders. So common values and ethics, defended borders define a country. All the other pieces of national interest that follow that are based on the fact that you have that group that is cohesive, unified, and solid, and they are intentional in their desire to defend the land they live in. So as if you want to destroy a country, you always do it from inside, not outside. It's the easiest way. And the first thing you have to break then is you have to destroy unity, and you have to ensure that the borders are no longer defended.
Serious stuff. Concerning things. And it seems
Very.
like most people aren't talking about it, aren't acknowledging it in Canada. And yet I think your statements and your passion show you're showing that this has already happened. Like you started saying that Justin Trudeau came to finish what Pierre Elliott Trudeau started. So you believe that he succeeded now?
I believe that he has made Canada completely open to takeover. The question is by whom?
Okay.
And is it a dictator from within? Is it a foreign entity? Is it a foreign country? Or is it special interest groups reflecting the wills of other very strong unified cultures such as Iran and the IRGC? But the largest enemy to Canada right now clearly is China. And there's no doubt about it in terms of every single action that's happened in the last 10 years within our own country.
So I asked earlier why, and we talked about control, and then you said also to have a different form of government, and communism is what Pierre Elliott Trudeau liked. So why on earth does somebody like Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who likes communism, why doesn't he live in a communist country? Why does he go and become a leader? Because it's not like he said, I'm running on a communist platform, obviously, because people would have been talking about that. But if that's really your intention and you don't even have the spine to say that, and then you're going to run a democratic country with camouflaged as a communist, essentially, to me, it's incredibly spineless. And so why do you think you do that? Did they want Canada to be in this position again? It's still a why. I still don't understand that. Go to another country then. There's lots of communism in the world. So feel free to run that one into the ground more.
Well,
No?
I think for each individual in life, you have to look at their history. How did they get where they are? All right. So remember, Pierre Trudeau was born back in the prior to World War II, and during World War II, when the war broke out in 1939, he was in the officer training program at a university. He found a way to get out of that very quickly and disappeared and did not serve in uniform during the war because he did not believe in Canada at all. He also didn't believe in what was going on in the world, and many people say he was a member of the Young Communist Party then, and the intent for Young Communists worldwide was to spread the Communist Manifesto. It wasn't to go live in a communist country, it was to make your country part of the collective, right? And we saw it. The history between the wars in the 1930s was a massive fight between communism and other forms of government, and in Europe, largely between fascists and communists, and the struggle that went on in Spain and all the lead up to World War II. But it was happening worldwide. And there was a full communist movement in Great Britain trying to overthrow the government in Great Britain, a fascist movement in Great Britain trying to overthrow the government, and the democratic system in Britain. So the three were in a constant tussle. So it was nothing new. This was happening all over the world. And I believe in his mind, he felt that he could ultimately bring the system to Canada. And certainly the actions that he took in his time in government showed it was step by step, thoughtful. How do you take a country, disintegrate it? And multiculturalism is one of the biggest tools that has been perpetuated on all of the countries in Europe, which many of them now are pushing back against.
Yeah.
They're removing their multiculturalism policies in most of the Scandinavian countries, in Holland and in other countries in Eastern Europe, in an effort to try and stop that slow creeping. But this is a very negative discussion from the point of view that I believe that the last 10 years has got us to this tipping point. And the
Yeah.
question is, how do we stop it and reverse it?
Yeah. And I'm with you on, but I think it's so important to understand the history of it too. And I'm learning a lot too, actually. But this, going back to the last question too, he didn't portray himself as a communist. And I get it that,
But he actually did. Which one are you talking about?
well, definitely not Justin, but Pierre, maybe
Pierre
it's
definitely did. He was quite proud of
okay.
his support for Mayo, for Fidel Castro, particularly Fidel against the United States. There was some pretty tense times between the U.S. government and Canada because of his very strongly worded type of actions. He actually tried to remove Canada from NATO back in the late 60s. And it was made very clear to him by the NATO countries, no tanks, no trade. So we ultimately stayed in NATO. But his intention at that time, and I'll bring you to Justin in a minute, his action at the time was to reduce the armed forces of Canada from 105,000 regular force, 105,000 Army, Navy, and Air Force, down to 70,000 extremely rapidly within 2 years. And his real intention was to go to 40,000, and he had publicly announced that it would be a Peace Corps, not an armed forces. And so right away, you start by attacking unity, then you destroy your national security. You get rid of those first two pillars of the national interest. And the world looked with surprise, horror, and aghast. You got to remember, it was different times. We'd just been through the Cuban Missile Crisis. We were afraid of atomic war. The Vietnam War was starting and getting into full swing by the end of the 60s. There was a lot of discussion about the movement of communism forward, and he was trying to help perpetuate it. I was called to testify in front of the Standing Committee on National Defense 2 years ago, October 2022, because Justin Trudeau had made a statement that it was his intention to downsize the armed forces of Canada and to commit fully 50% of it as a climate change action force, not as an armed force. And I was called to testify because I had the dual background of being a head of emergency management for the province of Alberta, so I understand exactly what emergency management was, but at the same time I had a 27-year career as an officer in the Army, and so I was asked to testify if this made sense to turn half of the armed forces into a climate change action force and only have half left for national defense. And so my testimony is of record, but he was continuing the thought his father had, which is ultimately you have to get rid of the armed forces.
Okay. And so I think you were, I don't know what, when you were saying, it's a bit of a, not negative, I think is a dark history, but I think it's just so important because, you said if we looked at history and what Pierre Elliott Trudeau did, you would see it. The thing is, I think most Canadians looking back now, the first 5-10 words associated to Pierre Elliott Trudeau is not a communist. Same with Justin Trudeau. So they were very good at disguising it. And this is, I think, because people don't understand and appreciate really how bad it is or was. And so that's why I think it's super important. The other point, and this goes into how we can solve things too, is I find very often we Canadians stay away from these discussions. Oh, don't say that about someone. We're trying to be politically correct or something, even though these are facts. And I find that, especially on the right, sometimes they're just not good at calling things out. So obviously, we've all seen how over the last 5 or so years, anyone on the right, even if you're exercising now, they'll label you as a far right extremist and worse. And I'm not suggesting that name calling is good, but calling out facts is important. And what we see on the left, and this is the Liberal Party of Canada, nobody's talking about its close association with the communist parties and liking those ideologies. Like, why can't we just look at the problems, talk about them like adults, and then we could talk about solutions? I feel that's a constant thread in Canada with every issue we have. We're just too scared to actually talk about things.
Well, I'll take you back to helicopter parenting, bulldozer parenting, and the
Right.
remove of all risk. And so that's why I'd say 2020 was perfectly timed, because by 2019, if I had said the word communist attached to Trudeau, the reaction was instant cancel culture. And so that's why, but when COVID hit, it was perfect. If you said anything that went against the narrative, and we know the narrative was a lie, it's coming out in the US in the congressional testimony, it's coming out in NIH, it's coming out in, but you weren't allowed to say anything different. And so it's perfect. You move the society to the point where they will accept no risk. So it is a risk to speak against anything that is said either by the media or by the government. And therefore, the media and the government can say anything they want, and there will be no repercussions on them. But there will be massive repercussions on anyone it's the old game of whack-a-mole. If you stick your head up, it'll get pounded down. And the second person who sticks their head up will get pounded down 6 times harder. And so people lost their careers during COVID for speaking the truth to power. Doctors, lawyers, all the people that went against the lockdown narrative and ultimately the vaccine narrative. But for the first 2 years, it was the lockdown narrative, and you couldn't say a word. But that had been put in place by 2019. And we saw the government of Canada constantly disparaging Canadians and pitting Canadians against each other, getting one group to attack another. And we see it right now happening with this government and with people in all stripes, all political parties, blaming the boomers. You break another group off and you find a reason to hate them. They're holding all their money. They're not selling their houses. Like, they didn't spend 80 years going through life to earn that. Oh no, you're not allowed to keep anything you earned. It's part of the collectives. That is the exact definition of communism, right? Everything is collectively owned. You own nothing. And so we're at this stage where helicopter parenting, bulldozer parenting, acceptance of no risk in your life means you don't challenge authority. Authority then becomes more tyrannical. They see that you don't challenge them. They become more tyrannical. You don't challenge them. And you're on this path to a total dictatorship, which is what communism is. It's a total dictatorship where you don't own anything, the collective owns everything, and they intentionally try and make sure that over 50% of the population counts on government for their salary. So each month, if you protest against them, they can stop the flow of cash that you need to live on to buy food and pay your rent.
Yeah.
They want 51% of the country to rely on their government for monthly salary.
Yeah, I don't think I got the memo about not speaking out because it's risky. I feel like
Within every group, there's always the troublemakers.
yeah.
And that's how people like you and I get labeled immediately. We're not to be listened to. We're troublemakers. If you haven't read George Orwell's 1984, It's so timely. If you haven't read Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, it's very timely. For anyone that hasn't read those two books, they need to read them because it's the perfect description of from 2015 till now.
Mhm. Yeah, really unbelievable. And I was going to ask you the next question here about how were they succeeding with this bulldozer and helicopter parenting? Because I was just thinking as you were saying it, how do you remove all risk? And so it's just impossible. It's not how things are in reality. And so you did mention removing the risk for speaking out. But were there other examples
Well,
as well?
it starts, one always has to remember that if you're playing the long game, and we know China is playing the long game, they've been very upfront about their intentions with Taiwan. They've got an exact date, and they're prepared to have taken 50 years to get to that, 50 years to get to that date, right? Not five. So if you're prepared to play the long game, the only way that you completely subvert a society is you start with a 5-year-old child. And you use the education system to change them from what their parents are into what you want the new society to be. And so helicopter parenting started in the schools, right? It started as such a wonderful thing because it was the great anti-bullying campaigns. So and the acceptance that parents would be responsible for any harm that came to a child. And so I give you, back when I was just starting to have my family, early 70s, I had friends tell me that the new plan that had just come out, RESPs, it was so important that you save for your child's education so they would never have to pay a dime and they could get a university education. And we had a discussion at a dinner party in my house where my friends called me Attila the Hun because I said, I'm not getting RSPs. When I was 18, my whole family, my brother, my sister, my parents said 18 out the door. You're an adult now. Make your way in the world. Okay, so remember, that's the mindset of 1965 through 70. 18 out the door, stand on your own 2 feet. And we were excited to do it. We didn't feel put upon. It was like, geez, I can't wait to get out that door. I joined the army and left, but my other siblings, they all went their own way, some to university, some to nursing, some. We left at 18 and we made our way. And everybody did that. It was the norm. By the middle of the 70s, it was, you have to have an RSP because it's your responsibility that your child has enough money to go to university. And if you don't, the courts will order you to pay. Like if there's a divorce, the divorced parents are ordered to have saved enough money for that child to be cared for till they're 25 in a university education. Why? The child probably shouldn't go to university, right? They should get a trade, get a job, do whatever. Regardless, in 65, 18 and out the door. And so what you do in the school system is you make it clear to a 5-year-old in kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, your mommy and daddy better be putting money away so you can go to university. University is the only path to a good life. So the teachers are teaching the child, and while they're going through that, the child starts to experience difficulties in mathematics. So the parents are taught to be obliged to go and pluck that child out, get the child a tutor, tell the teacher that, that the child needs extra help, that the child is feeling belittled or humiliated. And so the teacher has to back off. You're not allowed to say to Johnny or Mary, you need to do better in class. No, no, no. That's belittling the child. That's bad for their future. We found out that exactly the opposite is true. Helicopter parenting has led to total lack of self-esteem, which then got transferred to bulldozer parenting, where all risk was removed. And so for the next 20 years, instead of saying to the teacher, my poor child's being belittled, you need to do something to give them a participation award, a star for coming to class every day. A star for coming to class?
Yeah.
No, you only got a star if you were the top of the class in a given subject before. Now you get a star every day for showing up, and you put it in your little book, and it's how you do it. You start at the bottom and you work your way up. Now, bulldozer parenting is the child is failing in math, and it's all the teacher's fault, because that's a terrible teacher. And my Johnny's so bright, he would be getting A's if the teacher did their job. I want that teacher fired. So the next teacher's brought in and gives Johnny an A, even though Johnny deserves a D.
Yeah.
And so you do that over and over and over. And what you see is the teachers start to believe it because they went through the process where they were helicopter parented. They go to university, come back, and they're all in for making sure no child is left behind, making sure every child advances with age group rather than with merit. And merit is removed from the discussion. So we're in that situation. How do you do it? How does it happen? It happens slowly. And if you're prepared to play the long game, and communist countries are, you start, but you always start with the children. The same was exactly true for fascism, right? Any totalitarian government. And so I have a really good friend. We had great discussions when we were in the army. We're still good to have these discussions. It's not left and right, okay? It's not communism and fascism. It's a circle. And up here is you as an individual living in the forest all by yourself. You have total freedom. Every day you wake up, you have to find food, you have to build your shelter, and there's no help. You don't have friends, it's all you. So at the top of this circle is the individual. And so you can go either left or right, and you intentionally do it to build a larger group to help support you, and you give up a little bit of that individual freedom as you go either way around this circle in order to minimize your risk, and you take the accountability for accepting I lose a little bit of freedom every time I move either direction.
Yeah.
But if you follow that circle all the way down, at the bottom is a dictator. And I don't care whether you call it a communist dictator or a fascist dictator, it's a dictator, it's a circle. And so you can move either way, but where you're ultimately ending up is a totalitarian dictatorship. And you can call it by two different names, I don't care. It's a dictatorship. And so up here at the very top, let me take you back to that first definition of a country. A country is when a group of people with shared ethics and values decide to come together, whether they're slightly left or slightly right, here at the top of the circle, and live in a defined geography and work together to defend their borders and their ethics and values.
Mhm.
Okay? That's at the top of the circle. And as the time you come down to the bottom of the circle, that's gone. Now you've got a dictatorship where the ethics and values are defined for you, not by you.
Yeah. Well, and I was just going to go to that balance between individual liberties and government control because, and it really interesting how you pointed that out. And it's almost like people have forgotten that there's a social contract too, that you agreed to live in a social contract, but that at the same time you can still question the government and demand that they do better because we are paying for this. So it's, you said earlier that they've kind of completed this mission. So do you think that we're at the bottom of this, your circle right now?
If I'm going left, I think we're here. Okay? Because, and it doesn't matter whether you go right or left, but in the case of Canada, we've gone left and we're here. We have a government that now believes that they can prorogue Parliament, they can not answer questions from Her Majesty's legal opposition for the entire fall, from September all the way through. Parliament was frozen because the government refused to disclose how it was blowing billions of dollars out the door with no accountability. That was the whole fall. Then government was prorogued. Then we went through this election, and now we have a government that has refused to present a budget and yet is planning to spend billions more than the previous government. So government is at the point where it believes it has no accountability to the people. None. That's a dictatorship. And
And I,
Canadian people are sitting in their homes going, well, okay, I guess that's just the way it's going to be.
yes. And I think that's why people are feeling confused, lost, uncertain what to do. People that recognize there's a problem possibly don't recognize how bad it is as well. And I'm already sitting here anxiously like, what are we going to do about it? David, how are we going to solve it? Because I am, like I said earlier, if there's a problem, I 100% believe there's a solution to everything. People, I think, sometimes think I'm very naive with that. And I don't think so. I think the power is with the people. The people have to get educated and organized and have a bit of courage and guts, grit. And I think we can do things, but I think we need some idea of what we're doing. And that's maybe where we're at right now. There's a lot of energy, a lot of confusion, which probably was part of the long-term plan as well. So how do we get out of this?
So it's why I wrote the paper. Okay. And the first thing you have to, in any, we used to call it the estimate of the situation in the military. It's now called the operational planning process. But the first step when you're given a huge challenge is you gather the data, you gather really smart people so that you have all the different types of solution brains in the same room, and then you do what's called mission analysis. And you define all the whats. What needs to be done to make Canada the country that it should and could be? And so in the paper, the reason I wrote the paper is most people don't know where to start. So in that mission analysis step, the first thing you have to do is define the whats. So what I tried to do is present my perception of what the whats are. And let me tell you where I got my whats from, because there's 6 national interests, in my opinion, that define any country in the world. In a democracy, those 6 are very pointed, and part of them are rights and freedoms, and we'll get to that. But if you don't give a structure, people go all over the place. And what we've watched the government do very successfully for the past 10 years is to pick tiny little pieces out of the 6 national interests and say, this is the most important thing. We've got to do this. And if you don't agree with us, then we will cancel you out of our culture. Okay. And so I want people to think holistically and not allow tiny little pieces to be plucked out and used as wedge issues. So when I framed the paper, I framed it based on what I was taught. So again, let me take you back in time. When I was first in the Army, I went through 2 years at Royal Roads in Victoria and then 2 years at RMC. So 4 years of military college to become an officer in uniform for all 4 years. In my 3rd year, because I was going to be an officer that was going to be with a little flag on my shoulder all over the world, and other nations' soldiers, but other nations' citizens would talk to me constantly and say, why are you here? And what does Canada represent? So in 3rd year, in the Royal Military College of Canada, back in the 70s, we were taught a course which was, what are the 6 national interests of Canada?
Mm-hmm.
How are they applied? That was a 6-month course. So we were taught this stuff.
Yeah.
It's not done anymore because nobody has taken the time to redefine the national interest in a process. It used to be a process led by government at the federal, provincial, and municipal level to define a 25-year vision where our country would be and engage Canadians, and Canadians were excited about it. But as an officer in the Army, I was expected to know them down to a granular level, all
Mm-hmm.
6 of them. And then in the second half of that year, we were taught the white paper on national defense, which is a piece that falls out of one of the 6, because that was our profession. And when you get to national security, one element, one of 15 elements in national security, is the Armed Forces of Canada. And so the white paper on national defense, which describes exactly why we have an armed forces, Army, Navy, and Air Force, what their roles are in terms of sovereignty, defense of North America, defense with other allies, including NATO, NORAD and NATO, and how we cooperated for international stability operations worldwide. And so we had to know the white paper inside out, but first we had to know where it fit in that full national interest. So
Right.
I went back and I searched trying to find the current definition of the 6 national interests of Canada attached in any way possible to a 25-year vision for our country. Because you start with a 25-year vision, and that vision is defined step by step by the whats in the 6 national interests. Okay, that's how you define the vision. You base it on those. You don't allow a discussion about one of the little tiny pieces and pretend that it's a whole piece of a national interest. You start with the six, then you subdivide them, subdivide them, subdivide them, subdivide them, and you engage Canadians all the way along that discussion to energize them. This is a 25-year vision of our country, and if you want to get there, these are the six elements, and here's how this one will lead you there, and this one will lead you there. Because then every decision that a politician makes has to be justified to the citizens of the country based on that vision. And Canadians can see that it's coherent, cohesive, and well thought through. And the discussion we should be having election after election isn't which government's going to do the best for me and give me, I hate it when people say, I'm going to give you a tax cut. No. Tell me how you're going to unify my country, defend my country, govern my country, defend my rights and freedoms, make my country the most prosperous country in the world, economic prosperity and growth, and how you're going to care for the societal well-being of my country, including the education system and the medical system. So all six of them. And show me how this decision relates to this 25-year vision. And if you can't, I don't want you to be my government. I'll take that group because they've defined, this is the same vision. How we're going to get to that vision is all we should be discussing in each election. Which party's going to get us here best? Because we all like this vision.
Yeah.
Right? And so that discussion has to engage Canadians, but Canadians don't even know what the six national interests are anymore because that discussion stopped in the 1960s when Canada was so proud of itself, knew where it stood in the world, and was, as other countries frequently said, the next 100 years belonged to Canada because we had a plan tied to a vision.
Yeah. Well, funny when you said, I'll give you a tax break or whichever. I have such a hard time with that too because it's taxpayers' money to begin with. Like that, nobody should be celebrating that ever. And we need to call that out more instead of congratulating our elected officials for, I don't know, actually doing their job
Giving
for
us
once.
1% of the money they took from us
Yeah,
back.
exactly. So I have such a hard time with that. But I do appreciate where you took this with a 25-year vision because I actually, for the first time, maybe, David, you made me feel bad for bureaucrats. And maybe I'm wrong here in that if our elected officials aren't giving Canadians a mission and a goal, those working in the government also don't have a mission and a goal. And so then maybe that's why there's, what's going on. And I don't really want to get into that, but I was
Well, we
just,
should, because
yeah,
the point is the civil service,
yeah,
and I was very proudly a member of the civil service and did my best to support elected officials who told the public what they were going to do. But what
mhm,
we've gotten ourselves to now, particularly after the last 10 years and the next 4 that are ahead of us, is we have a civil service that feels it's its obligation to keep the government in power that's in power,
yeah,
not to administer programs that are attached to a 25-year vision for all the citizens of Canada. Their job is to maintain the stability of the government in power and to justify government decisions rather than to enact government decisions. And when those decisions don't turn out, the government falls. And so we've got a civil service now that in this last election, one party very clearly said that we had 100,000 new civil servants at the federal government level alone that were not required 5 years ago. And maybe it was time to have a discussion that they should go. And so right away, they all have to defend their rice bowl. That's their salary. And I take you back to the discussion when 51% of the population of a country count on government for their monthly salary, you can't get rid of that government. And you have achieved communism.
yeah. Well,
Right?
and how you said, I like how you said it. And I was saying bureaucrats, I often use the words public servants, and you use civil servants being proud to be a public
A public
servant.
servant. You're a servant of the public. Every decision, I was the director of counterterrorism in Alberta following September 11th. And there was a little path that took me there, but it was pretty quick. And one of the things that I said to the task force on security, I will never deny a charter right or freedom in the process of counterterrorism except for the minimum time required in an extremely narrow area for an extremely specific task. Otherwise, the terrorists have won. The whole point of counterterrorism is to not let terrorists dictate to the people of a country how they're going to live their lives. And so the whole idea of rights and freedoms of every individual citizen having the right to own property and live their lives in a safe and clear environment is destroyed if you put a totalitarian lockdown regime on an entire population because they're terrified that a terrorist might blow them up even though there's no terrorists.
Yeah.
And so to me, that to me showed me the job of the civil service, the public service, is to minimize any negative impact on the citizens while giving them the maximum benefit. And I saw exactly the opposite happening south of the border. The Patriot Act removed a whole bunch more rights from the citizens of the United States and handed all that power to the federal government. And in my situation here in Alberta, we were doing exactly the opposite. We didn't want the terrorists to win. Therefore, we did the minimum actions that could try and defend our critical infrastructure on a sliding scale of response and then bring it right back down again, not to hold our citizens in terror forever. Because the critical component that any government should be doing, regardless of what the task is to remove fear and to build confidence. Confidence empowers citizens. Fear controls citizens. And what we've seen repeatedly for the past 10 years, now 11, is that government wants to use fear to control our citizens, to take away their freedom of action, and to say to them, we're accepting all risk, you don't have to worry, because you're terrorized, so we'll do some more to make sure you're safe. And you just have to give up these rights and freedoms, and it's okay, because we will make sure nothing bad ever happens to you. That's an absolute lie. But
Well,
when you give
yeah.
confidence to people, they're empowered and they realize they can manage 99% of the risk in their lives themselves. They don't need government to do it.
Well, the thing is, it's a lie, and it's so obviously a lie. Like, I challenge people all the time. What has the government actually improved its services, public services and programs in the last 10 years? It can hardly do the most basic role. And I know this is more municipal than anything, but road management in all cities across Canada. And then we're going to pretend that it could take all risk for complicated social problems around the world and the globe. It's like, it's just such an obvious lie that it's mind boggling that people think, yes, they're doing their best and they're out there to help protect my safety and health. Health is down, safety is down. Those two very basic things that you kind of, in a socialized healthcare system, we're not doing well. So yeah, I just like, let's just acknowledge these. But I want to turn to these six interests because I think it's so important. And then just pointing at my book here, I wrote that book because I wanted to help educate Canadians on the legal political systems and how important it is to get engaged. And then when I was finishing it, throughout the whole time, I think I was thinking about the question, what does it mean to be Canadian? And then I went back to the introduction and I actually said that that was my most difficult question because I didn't actually know what that means. And I feel that I'm not the only one in Canada that feels that way. We've kind of lost it. And obviously, this discussion is bringing everything back and showing us how that was set up for us and how we've been living that for the last how many years. So, what, in your view, are the six national interests so that we could start thinking about these ideas and coalescing and having some more productive and positive discussions in this country?
Absolutely. So remember, 25-year vision. Canada as a thriving, confident country. Okay? thriving, not getting by,
Mhm.
confident in our future, confident that we are the best we can be, and confident that we're going to be better. All right.
Mhm.
So thriving and confident, that's your 25-year vision. And so a 25-year vision based on what? Number one, unity. And we should, happy in the future to have a whole hour discussion about unity.
We will. I'm
Okay.
taking you up on it right now.
Because unity, remember my definition of a country, it's when a group of people come together, and everyone says culture. I'll have a discussion about that. So unity is based when a group of people who share a common culture, and the culture's got to be based on common ethics, values, and beliefs. Okay,
Mhm.
and what are Canadians' ethics, values, and beliefs? We had a prime minister who said we don't have any. There are no Canadian values. There are no, and then we've just had a prime minister who say Canadian values are those of the Islamic world. He said that publicly 2 days ago, 3 days ago. Unbelievable. They're the exact opposite. Okay, so we can have that discussion, but that's a much fuller discussion for another day. So unity, when a group of people who share common ethics and values. So let me talk about the word culture, because culture can be used interchangeably, but it always then leads you down a dangerous path. That's why I always say ethics, values, and beliefs. In Switzerland, there are three distinct cultures. All right. There's
Yeah.
the German culture, the Italian culture, and the French culture in one country. But what's common in those three cultures is they share the same values and beliefs. Okay, it's a Judeo-Christian society that believes in rights and freedoms. Okay, so their ethics, values, and beliefs are the same. So yes, there's three cultures, but if you, what you saw is the Islamic culture trying to be introduced into that country, and that country rejecting it. So shared ethics, values, and beliefs. Okay, so unity is when people come together to have that. And unity isn't given, because societies change and morph and become something different, and that's a good thing. What you have to ensure is that you have pride in your ethics, values, and beliefs. So
Mhm.
pride in your history, pride in how you got there, and a path forward to a future that everyone knows will maintain that unity. Okay? So, and how do you do that? You start always ensuring that your history is proudly taught starting at the age of 5. Right? Your school system has to actually explain to children as they're growing up, and their parents now, unfortunately, what is Canada, and why do so many other countries, peoples want to come here? And I mean the good ones, not the ones that are trying to destroy our country. Why do people look at Canada and go, they're different? I don't want to go to the United States. I don't want to go to Australia. I don't want to go to New Zealand. I want to go to Canada,
Mhm.
because Canada represents something. I found it when I wore that maple leaf on my shoulder. People looked at us and went, oh, geez, I wish I would have been born a Canadian, right? So unity, number one. So out of the six, unity, and number two, national security. So when a group of people who share common ethics, values, and beliefs live in a geography which they are prepared to defend their borders.
Mhm.
Very basic definition of a country. You can look it up in the Oxford Dictionary. So those are the two fundamental of the six national interests: unity, national security. And national security, again, another whole hour discussion, because national security is made up of intelligence services, border services, um, uh, old timers, intelligence services, border services, your policing services, your emergency management services, your critical infrastructure protection, your immigration services. That was the third one that was eluding me. So your immigration services, your policing, your emergency management services, your critical infrastructure protection, and way down at the bottom is your Canadian Armed Forces, your military services, right? Because it is the force of last resort. When all of this has failed to defend your sovereignty, then you have the Canadian Armed Forces, because you use all these tools every day before you ever get to here. So the whole discussion about national security, we've seen this current government for the past 11 years destroying our intelligence services, belittling them publicly and saying that when they're warning them of Chinese foreign interference and police stations in our streets and interference, direct interference into our elections, it was denied for the first 4 years and then dismissed for the next 6. Still, the foreign registry is not in place. Still, no discussion about this very last election. Direct interference in individual ridings, right? No discussion. So your intelligence services have been destroyed and belittled and removed from the discussion. Your border services, we saw the United States call us out, say we're a joke and a sham. I feel sorry for the people in the border services who are trying every day to do their job and the people in intelligence services who have been dismissed and ignored, okay? Immigration services intentionally destroyed. We now have a prime minister saying 2 million new Canadians a year is a good number. It's an unacceptable number because we can't integrate those people into our society. They are changing our society, not integrating into our society. Policing services. We see Hamas supporters funded by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard marching in our streets in all our major cities every weekend, calling for genocide against Jews, Christians, and Canadians. And the police are inert. So policing services, our emergency management services. We hear these stories of climate change, but we don't fund our emergency management services to help manage whatever happens within our fires, floods, tornadoes, and terrorism. So critical infrastructure protection, I don't even think the government of Canada knows what the word means. And certainly they are doing nothing to protect it on a daily basis. I know that for a fact. That used to be part of counterterrorism, and I'm still well informed. The Canadian Armed Forces, they have intentionally destroyed, belittled, and humiliated, and the General Officer Corps has completely lost the beat. They have no idea what's happening at the private corporal level within the armed forces. That's why we have a recruiting challenge that no one wants to join, and anyone that does leaves within their first 3 years. We're in a complete collapse within our armed forces. So we can have a whole discussion about national security. So unity, national security.
Well, and I want to stop you on those two before we continue a little bit because, and I have two questions on this. The first one being, and this could sound very redundant to you, but why do we need these things? Because I think this is the narrative of the other side is saying, well, we need to you're such a bad person that you want to exclude people from your border and have this one shared values and ethics and beliefs. That's so exclusive. And why on earth? Why would we be doing that? And why shouldn't we bring in anyone and everyone into a country, and why defend it?
Because if you don't, you're not a country. A very simple definition, a group that shares common ethics and values within a geography that they're prepared to defend with defined borders. And so let me flip the question. Name me another country in the world, particularly those that are trying to destroy Canada, that would accept mass immigration into their countries. Do you see mass immigration into Iran? Do you see mass immigration into Russia? How about China, where they put the Uyghurs in what we would concentration camps?
Yeah.
A country that is a country that knows its country and that has defined its ethics and values, allows others to join them, but on a rate that they can be integrated, because the reason those people come to Canada, other than those that are trying to destroy us,
Yeah.
is because they like the Canadian ethics, values, and beliefs and want to become part of that. And what's happening now? They're leaving. They're arriving and going, holy smokes, this is not as advertised. These people don't know who they are, and they're allowing the very people that terrorized us, that we fled, to terrorize us here. Let's talk about the people from India who are daily terrorized in our country. even the Calistanis to a degree. And I think they're part of the problem, not the solution. But each of the groups that come to Canada that want to break our country up aren't here because they want to be Canadians. They're here because they want to bring their wars to our land. That's why we have to do it. We have something to be very, very proud of. The history of our country is one that's different than any country in the world. And again, in a discussion about unity, we can have that discussion about how we got here and why we're so completely different than our neighbors to the south, than the European countries that we came from. And people came here because we were different. All right? That people came to Canada knowing that Canada was different. And I had people in Europe and people in Africa and people in the Middle East tell me why Canada was this beacon to them. All right? And we've lost our way, particularly in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
So
No.
that's why you have to do it, because
Yeah.
otherwise you're just not. And there's an old saying, it's at the start of my paper on national defense, which I published in December in C2C Journal. Every country has an army, theirs or somebody else's. Because if you don't defend your borders, you will lose your country. It may take longer than you think, but they are here now in our streets. They who don't want Canada to exist. And I put it to you that the United States of America trumps not a very polite person, but the United States has long been calling us out. Obama, in his speech to Parliament, when he said we need more Canada, wasn't talking about Canada's social policies. He was talking about our lack of 2% funding on our own defense. And if you go to the speech, he was very specific. Leading up to that, he was calling us out for not defending our own country. And when he said we need more Canada, it was we need you to step up, pay your 2%, do your part for NATO, but equally importantly, help us defend North America. Because if we don't, the United States will be forced to. And the whole idea of manifest destiny, the United States will do manifest destiny, which is they believe all of North America belongs to them. And so if we're not prepared to do our role in defending the continent and thereby ensuring their national security, they'll do it for us, all right.
Yeah.
That's why
Well,
you have to do it.
yeah, and I think you explained that so well. And I'm actually going to save the other question for when we talk about national security. So I'll leave that. But okay, so I'm on board with the two first ones.
Okay, the next one is good governance. So unity, national security, good governance. And good governance, everybody goes, well, what the hell governance?
I
Good
like that one.
governance, you wouldn't. You wrote a book on it. I can see it on the shelf behind you. So good governance, to break it into a few simple bullets, and I'll probably miss a few because of old timers. But number one is a trusted election system. And we've seen some concerns about that for 3 elections in a row. But a trusted election system that's fair and independent of government. Number 2, elected officials that are clear and transparent. I think we've seen that completely destroyed faith of Canadians in their elected officials at every order of government, federal, municipal, provincial, territorial. So clear and transparent elected officials. An independent, a clear legislative process that ties a vision to an actual plan for a deliverable. All right, so a clear legislative process that ties the national interests to actual actionable plans that are resourced so that people can see they're getting value for money. An independent judiciary. Okay, good governance includes an independent judiciary. We've seen a whole bunch of concerns about our judiciary in the last 10 years, and specifically in the last friggin' 5 years with COVID. An independent and effective media. Independent media is part of good governance, right? Yeah. And so without all of those pieces, and I know I'm missing one, but those bullets are the core essential bullets. And then you have to break those out into sub bullets so you understand what it means for an independent election system at each order of government. And what do you mean by that? If a country the size of Poland can hold an election, use paper ballots and count them, hand count them within 8 hours with no conflict, with independent oversight, why can't we do it in this country? You know, with a population of their size versus a population of our size, there is no excuse. Electronic tabulating, we know that the voting machines in every election that they've been used in, and I don't mean just in Canada, I mean in other countries, have been called into question because you can flip a zero for a one and do a whole bunch. Regardless, all of those bullets make up good governance. So number 3 was good governance. Number 4, rights and freedoms. This is a democracy, Canada. And so one of the things I was taught as an officer, very young, still an officer cadet, before I got my stripe and a half as a lieutenant, was the rights and freedoms of Canadians is why the Armed Forces of Canada exists. It was right in our national defense policy, but it was in the definition of both national security and rights and freedoms. What does it mean by rights and freedoms? And we need to break those out. When I put it in the paper, I simply used the breakout that's in the charter, right? And I put them in there, but tried to get to people to understand that it all starts at the top. For every right you have, for every freedom you have a responsibility. Okay? Human beings are accountable for themselves and for ensuring that they don't deny the rights or freedoms of another person in order to simply justify their right and freedom. So they work sometimes and push me pulley, but it's the individual responsibility of Canadians to demand the rights and freedoms and then take their personal responsibility to ensure they exist. And if you're not prepared to go through the hardship of defending your rights and freedoms, then you don't deserve them.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just laughing at the frustration of trying to when you're expressing it because I felt the same thing.
You know, I love Canadians that demand their rights and freedoms, but they're not prepared to do anything to defend them. And in fact, do exactly the opposite. They support a government that is trying to take them away. And knowingly and blatantly. I mean, the whole discussion about the legislation for media and all of the funding of the CBC and the CTV and Global in order to get their own message. I mean, you are intentionally destroying your rights and freedoms. You're destroying your good governance. Anyhow. So we got down to rights and freedoms.
Just the one thing I would add or comment on that, and I was saying this quite a bit earlier when there was so much discussion about, I think, corruption in Canada or the United States, I can't remember, or with Dodge. And so I was just saying always the antidote to corruption is radical transparency. And I just think that that would help so much for Canadians to understand rights, freedoms, responsibilities, good governance, all these things. If they could actually see what was going on. It just was so much behind closed doors, and I think there was a trust. Anyway, that's just one
In-camera sessions should be almost banned. Now, don't get me wrong. I was a soldier for a lot of my life. I held top secret with letter identifiers. I know why some things need to be secret. I don't think you should go tell the enemy what your most critical infrastructure is. Why help the enemy, right? So I understand that some things need to be done behind closed doors, but you should almost have to justify every in-camera session and why that information shouldn't be completely transparent to the public, especially when it's done by government. Okay. Now I understand industrial trade secrets too, because there's so many pieces of this puzzle that there are evil countries in the world that are trying to destroy our country. And so we have to be cognizant of that. And we have to put in place things that defend our rights and freedoms every day while not helping the enemy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Sounds great.
So we got down to number 4. So you just, recap: unity, national security, good governance, rights and freedoms. You can't afford to do all of this without number 5, which is economic prosperity and growth. And so in the paper, I break out my bullets for economic prosperity and growth, but in particular, you have to establish what are going to be your core industries? Because I don't want to talk about services, the services industry. That's a redistribution of wealth. First, you earn the money, then you can spend it on a service. And that
Mhm.
should be your choice, what services you spend it on. But first of all, you've got to create wealth. And so as a country, back in 1967, I wish you had been a teenager right then and heard this discussion, because you can say things so eloquently. But the point of what we were madder than hell because Canadians were seen by the world as hewers of wood and haulers of ore. And one day, Canada, in our 25-year vision, was going to be a manufacturing demon. And we were going to have all these other industries that were going to flock into it. And everybody said, yep, we're going to Canada. First, they got the resources. Now we're going to do all the value-added industry, right? For all the, look, we don't have to transport it. All the resources are there. We can have these massive industries. So Canadians were angry when the world said hewers of wood and haulers of ore. And right now, what we're hearing is we want to be the haulers of ore and all the critical minerals in the world. We want to be the extractors of oil. We want to be, and we're so proud of those resource industries. I really am too. I think resource industries are the bedrock of Canada as a nation. Always have been, always will be. Very proud history of it, a history we need to continue. But we really do need to expand value-added industry. We need to bring manufacturing back into our country, in particular for national security. Remember, every one of the six interrelates with all the other six.
Yeah.
So we need a firm industrial base that can create wealth, but that is tied to all of the national interests of our country and where Canada will be in 25 years. So we got to talk about manufacturing. We've got to talk about the high-tech industry. We've got to talk about all those things that in 25 years will be as important as being the hewers of wood and the haulers of oil, of
Yeah.
ore, because we should never throw away what this wonderful country has as natural resources, but at the same time, we want to translate that to a wonderful vision for our future, a confident, prosperous. So economic prosperity and growth. So in the chapter at the end, I talk about what is research and what is development. Everyone says R&D and they just group them, right? Research, for every dollar spent, you'll get 1 penny of value back, because research is just doing the unknown. But we have to define what makes sense for Canada to invest those really precious research dollars in. And I don't mean by directing where industry is going, but you can't be a master of everything. So pick what our universities, what our technical schools, and what our blue collar trades are the best at, and see if that leads us to a logical 25-year vision that we should invest research dollars in. Once you've found one of those things that's starting to look really good, then you do development. And that's where you do sometimes pick winners and losers, and you have to decide how to invest those development dollars. But I put it to you that they shouldn't be government funded development. If you've done it right, private sector will chase those development dollars because the return on investment is way higher, and they only need one win to get a massive return on investment. So research, perhaps with government assistance, with citizen assistance, let's call it what it is, with citizen assistance, but development largely private sector. And so I talk about the specific industries and that Canadians should have a discussion about and define where they want that country to be, but then the R&D side of it, the research and development that is taking us to the 25 years and beyond.
Mhm.
And then the very last of the six national interests, I call it personal and societal well-being. And in that, how do we make, and that's why I start with personal, why are we talking about the current generation will live a shorter lifespan than their parents in a country like Canada? We have clean drinking water. We have access to food. We have good shelter. Why is it even imaginable that this generation will live a shorter life than the generation that gave them birth. So personal well-being starts with the individual taking responsibility for their body. Okay, and that self-responsibility, to me, if you go back to ancient Greece, they talked about that self-respect leads to self-confidence, self-confidence leads to courage, but it all starts with self-respect. And
Mhm.
so the self-respect is based on you taking charge of your body and doing the best you can for your body. I recognize some people have crippling disease and are born with it, that some people have physical and mental disabilities, but to be the best you can be with what you've been given. That's self-responsibility, not somebody else's. So this all starts with personal well-being, so that you wake up in the morning, and I always used to say to my wife, and it used to drive her crazy, I have to shave in the morning. That means I have to look in the mirror and see this jerk looking back. And I want the jerk that's looking back at me to be somebody I can be proud of. Okay? Because no one else is going to be proud of me unless I can be proud of myself. That's where self-confidence comes from. But that's a personal, individual responsibility to do the best you can. So personal well-being that then leads to societal well-being. Knowing that most of risk is yours to manage, and helping those others in your society that for some reason, either for a short period of time, can't care as well for themselves as they would wish,
Mhm.
or they have a life challenge that needs to be helped by society. So in societal, I put our entire healthcare system, including the mental health care system, the physical healthcare system, and starting always with the basis of individual responsibility and doing preventative before you get to corrective, right? And then emergency services layered on top with surgical and all the rest of it. But then the entire education system, starting with kindergarten all the way through the grade school system. Then what do we talk about when we talk about technology schools and all the rest of that? Universities, postgraduate, graduate, but an ever diminishing number of people in those, because the real aim in life is to get out there, make money, have a home, have a family, and live your life, right? And it's not to spend your whole life in an education system. And I hear about, lifelong learning. Of course, there's lifelong learning, but you pick up after 10 years of doing something, you go, there's a piece that I can add to this. And you go back and you grab that. But you don't spend the first 20 years of your life in school doing nothing and then suddenly decide to have a career at 40. You need to be able to do apprenticeships again. Okay? And I don't mean just for the trades. I mean for things like nursing. Why are we sending people for 4 years to university and that they never see a patient until it's I want them to get back to when my sister went through nursing, it was in a hospital, and they learned in the morning what they did in the afternoon
Yeah.
for three
Well,
years, and they
yeah.
walked out the door fully qualified and competent. We should be
Yeah.
doing that with lawyers. We should be doing that with so many professions, right? Engineers. I'm an electrical engineer. I didn't open the back off of a system that I have a master's degree in until I had a master's degree. I should have
Yeah.
been playing with that stuff every single day of my university education. Okay,
Yeah.
so when I talk about personal and societal well-being, I think we need to have a real critical discussion about personal responsibilities, and then we need to look at our healthcare system, all aspects of it, and our educational system to give the society the tools it needs to have a vibrant economy, to have a great governance system, to have strong national security, and to have complete unity as we build the whole process together while defending the rights and freedoms that define us as a country.
Well, and just going to the last topic, but I think it actually goes to all of it, is I find that when you describe it that way too, that's actually being kind and compassionate to others instead of allowing them to be in kind of like their most vulnerable state where, there's always a safety blanket maybe on them. We're here to take care of you, or that there's a safety net in the event you need it. So like that is beautiful, but I don't hear that very often.
And
So
it's
I,
not there to keep you in that blanket forever.
Yeah.
It's until
Yeah.
we can get you so you can live your life again.
Yes. So yeah, to me, it's like right now people are given a safety blanket and oh, like to coddle you, but really what you want is a safety net in case you fall. We're here, but you're up there
With a
on your own.
minimum time required, and then
Yeah.
you're on your feet again. And
Yeah.
that whole let's go. And so I just to circle back, we've
Yeah.
talked about all six in a very generic and general form. And I really want to reemphasize the point that all six of them constantly interact with the other
Yeah.
six. That they're not little discrete bubbles. But if you don't understand the basic structure of the six, then a government can take one little piece of one and say, if you don't like immigrants, you are a horrible person.
Yeah.
And ignoring the impact of that on economic prosperity and growth, ignoring on national unity, ignoring on national security, ignoring on good governance, because some of them came here actually to destroy our good governance. Ignoring, you got to see the whole to understand how the government currently is taking tiny wedge issues, flipping them, and driving them to destroy all six. Right? And so all six are interrelated, but all six relate to a vision. And what we have been missing, in my opinion, is political parties and whether you're at the municipal order of government, the provincial, territorial, or the federal order of government, a political leader saying, this is where I see Canada in 25 years. This is where I see Edmonton in 25 years. Not tomorrow, not by the end of my term. This is where I see Edmonton being in 25 years. This is my, do you think that's a good vision? I want you to tell me if you think it's a bad vision, and I want you to tell me what's a better vision. And let's have this discussion. Your whole idea of dialogue. Let's create where every one of those six national interests, which are provincial and municipal interests, get talked about in a meaningful way, and we hold elected officials to account if they don't deliver the piece they promised in their path to the 25 years.
Well, and the other thing, yeah, like let's have an elevated conversation about these things finally in this country. But the other thing is I think that that's a problem for citizens to kind of get on board with leaders because they don't know what their visions are. They don't know what their like foundational
Well, and
principles
citizens
are.
don't walk into the room armed and dangerous with the big issues. They walk in the door with a little wedge issue that they're
Yes,
really unhappy with the politician about. So let's give the citizens the
yes,
words to talk meaningfully and say, you know, you talk about this, but show me what that does to national security. I have
yeah,
real concerns. Show me what that's going to do to our economic prosperity and growth. You tell me that this is going to be wonderful, but so far, I've seen it in other countries and it's not turning out that way. So why is what you're saying different than what they tried in Sweden?
yeah.
Why is it different than what they tried in the United States, right?
And then it's that's kind of like uh, description of a leader is that they're showing you a vision, something you can be get behind as a citizen. Oh, that's a leader I want to follow. That's somebody I want to support and be there. And I feel that in Canada, it's like, oh yeah, I think this guy is pretty good. So I feel like I should vote for this person. And then they change their mission or their vision or maybe they're still on track but we just don't know because it's
Exactly. And why do we use um, language that is directed only at one group or one person without talking about the whole? You know, I don't want mottos. I don't want slogans. I don't want, all the rest of this stuff. I'm going to give you a tax break being one of them, right? What does a tax break mean to all those six?
yeah.
You know, where does that fit in? Is that in my personal well-being, but it destroys the other five? Yeah, so explain to me like I'm a grown-up what you're going to do and how it's going to affect the 25-year vision of my country, because all I'm hearing is free money. And we've got a society that loves the cash when they forget that it's their cash.
Yeah.
Right. And I love the discussions about the money following the patient and the money following the student and all the rest of that. We need to have that discussion on a big scale. The money following each of the six national interests. And what am I getting for the taxes that take 5.5 months of my life to pay before I earn a penny for myself. What's my value added in each of these six? And show me why that government program exists, because I'm telling you, it ain't fitting to any one of the six national interests. It's only keeping government in power. Right? And so we need to have these meaningful discussions. And so in the paper, I actually get to the point at the end where I talk about trying to engage from the bottom up, starting municipal order of government, but getting local people that are running for office now to use those six words, right? The six national interests, and force the other politicians to have discussions in those ways, and to try and get the population through whatever education system to demand the use of those six words and to become engaged in them. And again, it took us 40 years to walk down helicopter parenting, bulldozer parenting, to get to this point where no one accepts personal responsibility anymore. So it's going to take at least a decade to start walking it to a meaningful level back. So I'm not naive, but if we don't start, we'll never get there. And I want to get Canada back for my grandchildren. I'll be dead, but I want to get it back for my grandchildren so that 40 years from now, they're having the discussion about Canada that I had when I was a teenager.
Sounds like a good vision and mission.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah. So last question maybe, and we'll wrap it up for today. But the goal is to have a discussion on all six of these
I would
national
love
interests.
to do a discussion on each of the six, one at a time, and with guests, if you wanted to have people come in and ask questions and be part of it, because it's easy just to talk about, but sometimes harder to defend, but they need to understand there's thought behind it, and I want them to put thought behind the future of their own country.
Yeah, and I think that if I can, we'll do both even, so that we have kind of a recorded place where people could go to and learn.
As a
And then
reference to understand the discussion topic on each of the six, and then we can open it up.
yes, and then I could get my brain around it all. But before we leave
Your brain
today,
is.
I started saying a little bit, it's like energy is everywhere. I think it's a little bit people feel lost and confused, myself included. I've kind of been feeling that way. And even though I am always an optimist. So maybe if you could share some words of optimism and what you see hopeful in Canada right now.
Okay, and
No pressure.
I'm not trying to be funny. I was well known in the Army for one of my sayings, which I passed on to some of my friends during COVID, which they constantly throw back at me.
Yeah.
In the Army, I learned the hard way that frequently you can't fix something until it's completely broken, because the people who broke it are invested in never taking blame for breaking it.
Mm,
Well, so you want my optimistic view? I think Canada is finally broken enough that we can turn the corner, because there are enough Canadians that know it's broken and want better. And so if we can engage 20% that turns into 30%, that turns into 50%, we can get Canadians to start talking about a 25-year vision for Canada that they're fully invested in. And I believe we're at that point that Canadians are ready to have a look. Now, the last election proved me wrong. So maybe we're not quite broken enough, because the people that want us to keep on the circle, that want to take us down here to tyranny, are doing pretty well. And
mhm.
what I've just seen in the last 2 weeks still shows me that we're quite happy to carry on as Canadian citizens down the path to self-destruction. So we need to find a way for Canadians to actually care that there must be a new vision for our country. And it's not one where they're hiding in their basements. It's one where they're out there proudly on the world stage, but even more proudly in their day-to-day lives in the streets of their cities, which are safe and which they are so proud of. They walk down the street and they look up and they go, wow, I'm a Canadian. Look where I live. Isn't this
Yeah.
great? Whether it's on a farm, whether it's in a small village or town, whether it's in a big city, or whether it's on a boat in the middle of a lake, they just go, oh, we're so lucky that we were born in Canada or that we immigrated to Canada and have made Canada our home.
Well, I'll put this to you too, is maybe that's kind of what we could come together on, and our mission too is just being the example, because I'm somebody that leads by example, and so, and that's what I just decided since the last 4 or 5 years is this is who I am and what I believe in, and I'm going to show it, and I hope other people join me for it, because I think people are getting a little bit frustrated and you know, less trustworthy of those saying that they are the leaders of this country. And so I think if we can show an example of what it means to be a leader and what it means to have a mission and a plan for a country or a municipality, maybe we could just lead by example and bring people in
Each
that way.
individual is responsible to be ethically fit, as physically fit as their body will allow them, as intellectually fit and up to date as is possible. But the first three are useless unless they take it upon themselves to have the courage to use the first three
So let's have the courage, David.
and
Okay, and
use it
then
with a
yes,
well-developed intellect, a good
yes,
body
no.
that won't let you down at the wrong moment, but based on solid ethics and values that are Canadian.
Well, I can say that I feel more optimistic, even though at the beginning it sounded like it was a darker, but I think we need to just have these discussions. And I'm so looking forward to continuing this discussion and having these um, elevated conversations about these important things so that we know what it is to be Canadian and we understand what it is to be part of Canada. So thank you again. And
If
I
I
look
can
forward
just
to
give
more.
one last one
Please.
for people who are watching, just if you want to go to the Frontier Center for Public Policy and just look for Canada 2024, a strong, resilient nation or a fractured, fearful country. And so the whole discussion that we've had today is in that paper. And if they need to go back and see what some of the words are and how the national interests break out, it's all there laid out for them.
Yeah, no, perfect. Thank you for that. We'll add that to the video and I'll have you tagged and all that good stuff. But
Super.
yes,
Thanks,
thank
Ella.
you for that. And again, I really, really look forward to continuing the discussion.
Have a great rest of your day.
Same to you.